if you're listening to this and you're 40, this idea of not ending up in a nursing home is actually not that motivating to people. Like for most people in our age group, I'm 52. Now, while I am starting to think about this next phase of my life, like not ending up in a nursing home isn't that motivating to me. It's not going to be the thing that like gets me on the ground doing my mobility work. But what does motivate me is being able to do what I want with my body now and as I age.
Hello, my Betties. Welcome to another episode of Better with Dr. Stephanie. It's me, your host, Dr. Stephanie Estima. Today, I have a fantastic conversation on mobility in midlife. My guest today is Juliet Starrett. She is an entrepreneur, an attorney, an author, a podcaster on a mission to help people move more. You can already see why we are going to get along so well. She's the co-founder and CEO of the Ready State, which has pioneered musculoskeletal self-care and recovery. Juliet, along with her husband Kelly, coaches and guides members of the Ready State Starrett system, helping them build durable, pain-free, high-performing bodies through practical science-backed training. She's a certified master nutrition coach and co-founder and CEO of San Francisco CrossFit, this is one of the first CrossFits to exist. And she is the co-author of the Wall Street Journal bestseller, Deskbound, and New York Times bestseller, Built to Move, and co-host of the Ready State podcast. So what did we talk about today? Well, let me say, in the words of Justin Timberlake, we are bringing mobility back. I think he didn't say that. I think he said we're bringing sexy back, but we're making mobility sexy in this conversation. So we talk about the sit to stand test, the couch test, why you should be squatting, what these things are doing for our mobility and how these translate into our muscle building goals and why these are important for us to consider not just right now, but for the long term. If you want to be the favorite grandmother, and there is a story in this conversation around the tale of two grandmothers, what this means for you and how you can integrate mobility into your everyday life. So this is not going to be some preachy, you have to have an hour of mobility drills every single day on top of your 1,000-item to-do list. We actually talk about actionable items in terms of how you can build in mobility into the time and the crevices of time that you already have. So I hope that you find this incredibly valuable. She and I are very much aligned in the application of mobility, how it can actually be integrated into a well-considered strength and conditioning program. So I think you're really going to enjoy this. And before we get to the show, I do want to just shout out one of the comments that we received on Spotify this week. This is from Lighthouse. That's the handle. So I would love to know your name, Lighthouse. Thanking you in advance. Lighthouse writes, I really love the way that you're adding your afterthoughts and reflections to the end of podcasts lately. This gives a natural close to the discussion when otherwise I didn't realize how much I felt I was left hanging after great interviews. Dr. Stephanie, you are exceptionally talented and have enriched my life with your podcast in so many ways. So let me just say, thank you so much for noticing. We have been doing the after party. This is a new feature to the podcast. So if you listen to the end, you'll find my real thoughts and real reactions to the conversation that we had. And thank you for noticing. All of your words are received with love, and we read all of your comments. So if you feel inclined to leave us a review or a rating, please do so. We see it all. So now please enjoy my conversation with Juliet Starrett. All right, and we're live. Juliet Starrett, I am just thrilled to welcome you to the Better Podcast. Welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited. I feel like this has been a long time coming since we chatted a few years ago.
Yes, and we were lamenting about perimenopause and menopause and women in fitness spaces, and I'm so happy that you're here. I'm so happy that we're going to have this conversation because there's many synergies between your work, my philosophy in terms of how I look at movement, and we're going to just get into all of your brilliance today. So can't wait.
Let's do it.
All right. So my first question for you, and maybe this is me coming as a clinician who feels in some ways that she's failed her patients a little bit, in that I could always get my patients, whether they were acutely injured, even a chronic pain patient, to start rehab. So I could get them to start mobility drills. I could get them to start working on flexibility. I could get them to start, after surgery, to start with, regaining passive or active ranges of motion. And then as soon as we sort of reached this tipping point of the pain was now subclinical, they couldn't feel it all the time. Mobility drills, I would ask them, how did your exercise go this week? And they would, sort of like tail between their legs, like, I forgot about it. So
yeah, I definitely didn't do that.
Right. And so I really struggled in terms of how to make mobility sticky, like how to make it, I don't know if it's sexy is the right word, but how to make it stick as much as maybe weight training, because weight training, it's like aesthetic, you look great, you building muscle, things are, you can sort of see the change. Whereas mobility, maybe less sexy. So first question is, and maybe just by way of background, the difference between strength training and mobility, and why make the case for my audience why mobility is essential.
Sure. And I'll just start by telling you that Kelly and I have been running a movement and mobility company for 20 years. And I think for many people, either in a sort of post-acute surgical phase or just in life in general, it is the first thing they cross off their list when they get busy. And I get it. I feel like we're in a phase in this sort of health, fitness, wellness business where, especially for women, it seems to just be this continual add-on of to-do items.
Yeah.
And at some point, we all have to choose what is a priority and try to do those things consistently. And hopefully I can make the case today that I think mobility should be one of those priority items, especially as we age. But I think what I'll start with is just defining what we believe mobility is. And, there's definitely, it can be a much more technical, clinical definition of mobility, but we've really landed on this definition that the mobility is the ability to move freely through your environment without pain and to be able to do the things you want to do with your body. And I like to share this visual for people because I think this helps me anyway. Everybody's probably been in a hospital, and for some reason, hospital hallways are like double wide hallways. I think it's so that they can, move the beds and everything through. Yeah. So the hospital hallways are like double wide hallways. When you're 20, your mobility is a hospital width hallway. You can pick up a new sport. You can get up and down off the ground. You never get out of bed feeling stiff. Those sort of niggling, tweaks, pains, ongoing things we all have as we age, and especially for those of us who move our body experience, you don't really have those when you're 20. Like your body's kind of plastic and you can sort of do whatever you want. You can pick up new sports and new activities and you're not really that sore when you wake up the next day. But as we age, and especially if we don't at least pay some mind to our mobility, that hallway begins to narrow. And what we don't want is the end result, which actually happens to a lot of people, which is the hallway is so narrow that they end up not able to do the things they love when they get older. And even worst case scenario, end up in skilled nursing, which, 1 in 4 people is going to by the time they're 80. And so I get it though. If you're listening to this and you're 40, this idea of not ending up in a nursing home is actually not that motivating to people. Like for most people in our age group, I'm 52. Now, while I am starting to think about this next phase of my life, like not ending up in a nursing home isn't that motivating to me. It's not going to be the thing that like gets me on the ground doing my mobility work. But what does motivate me is being able to do what I want with my body now and as I age. So one of my best friends is a financial planner, and he always talks to me about how when he's meeting with his clients about their financial future and what they're planning for, nobody actually wants to talk about their money. Like that's boring. What they want to talk about is what they want to do physically with their body. This is everybody. These are athletes and non-athletes alike. And on one end of the spectrum are the people who come to him and say, I just want to make it to my retirement and be able to, join my family at Disneyland and be able to walk 20,000 steps a day with my grandchildren, be able to sit with them on the floor and play with my grandchildren. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have people like me who, my personal goal is to be able to still ski and mountain bike when I'm 80, right? But you have everything in between. Everybody has physical goals. And unfortunately, mobility, and then I would say the subcategory of mobility, and that is balance, are really critical to be able to do the things you want to do as you age. And to me, that's much more motivating than this sort of ethereal, like, let's try not to end up in a nursing home. But that is the reality. The number one, at least in America, the number one injury cause of death after 65 is a fall. And if you fall and break your hip after 60, 65, you have a high likelihood of dying within the next 2 years. It can be really catastrophic. And there's a complex list of things that contribute to the fall risk, but mobility is definitely one of them. But in cultures where people sit on the floor, eat on the floor, toilet on the floor, sleep on the floor, the fall risk in the elderly is near zero. So contrast that to our countries where we don't spend time on the floor and definitely don't focus on our mobility and things like squatting, where we have, a scourge of orthopedic injuries, joint replacements, inability to get up and down off the floor, and a gigantic fall risk. So I don't know if that was.
Those are some
I
compelling
actually answered
reasons.
the question.
Yeah, no, it's great. Well, it's interesting that you say you want to be able to. You still want to be able to do all the things that you mentioned. When I first took my son skiing, we were teaching. I don't like downhill skiing, by the way. Like the injury profile, like the injury risk is just too high for me. But we're doing cross country skiing. So took my son's cross country skiing.
Sport.
Love it. And what I found really interesting, particularly in the Nordic skiing. So we're just doing like the classical skiing, but the Nordic skiers, they're like 80 years old and they were lapping us and they were saying like, great job. Like we were like going up and down hills and learning how to brake and all the things. And as they were lapping us, these 80-year-old guys and girls were like, good job, keep at it. And I was like, oh my God, this is what I want.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Yes, I have a similar story. Kelly and I were like traditional cross-country skiing up in Lake Tahoe. And we're like lifelong downhill skiers. We've always skied. And so we sort of thought it would be like a 1-to-1 translation. It turns out like skiing on toothpicks is a completely different experience than regular skiing. Like it's kind of sketchy.
Yeah.
But we'd gone on this big loop and we were coming out of this valley and it was sort of the last thing. And I was like, finally felt like I'd gotten the technique. I was like, I am crushing it. I'm slaying right now. And I'm not exaggerating. An 87-year-old woman passed me, was probably going 3 times faster than me. I mean, it was right at the moment where I felt like I just figured it out and I was slaying. Yeah. And then I was like, I am not slaying. This 87-year-old woman just passed me. But you're exactly right. Like those are the people that I look at. I see those people. And in fact, my current favorite sport is mountain biking. And I live in Marin County where it's like a mountain biking paradise. And so I'm always out on all these trails. And anytime I run into anyone out there who's either running, hiking, mountain biking, who looks to be over 75, I love to stop and talk to them and say, what are you doing up here? Like we're 8 miles from a trailhead and you're on a mountain bike and like, what's your secret? Like I love to just ask total strangers. And it's interesting because these people are always excited. They're not the kind of people who are afraid to share their age because they're excited to share their age. They know they're out there and that they're in the extreme minority and slaying. And, they love to tell their story and what they think their secret is. But it's those people that at least I know I want to be able to be like when I get older. And I think ultimately that's the goal. And again, that goal can be wide ranging. You don't need to be as aggro as we are trying to cross country ski and mountain bike. I have a dear friend who owns a CrossFit gym in Massachusetts, and he said he was blown away. He had a baby and his mother and mother-in-law both came to help spend time with the baby. They were there at the same time. And his mother is like super fit and could get up and down off the ground and what he noticed is just the fact that she was able to comfortably sit on the ground. She was able to have this much more intimate and connection with the grandchild than his mother-in-law, who was not fit, definitely not mobile, didn't feel comfortable interacting with the baby on the ground. And he said it was just right there before us, like these two people with these very different physical experiences. And just because his own mother could comfortably sit on the ground with the baby, she could have this like much more enhanced, interactive experience with her own grandchild. I was like, dude, I want that.
I want to be
able
the
to do
favorite
that.
grandmother. I like,
Yes.
I want to be that. Let me
But
say
I
that
want
out
that.
loud. Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that. That's amazing. And so let's talk a little bit about sitting on the floor, because I was saying to you just before we got going, I was like, I'm going to try this. Like, I'm strong. I can do this. And I got down on the ground, no problem. And then I just had to think a moment. I was like, what am I doing now? Like, okay, no hands. I'm not going to use my knees. I'm just going to get up using my feet. There's definitely a little bit of a technique. And then I did it with I started off with my right foot crossed over because that's just my dominant side. And then I did it with my left crossed over my right. And that was a little bit trickier. Like I found, it wasn't quite even from left to right. So I was like, okay. So talk to us a little bit about why sitting, being able to get on the floor and getting up off the floor unassisted. So not coming onto your knees or not using your hands. Why is this an indicator of a dynamic body? The mobility definition that you gave, freely being able to move your body through a range of motion without pain. Why is this a good indicator of that?
Sure. So what you're talking about is called the sit and rise test, and it's based on a 2016 study where researchers put several thousand people through this test. And I'll try to describe it a little bit so people can try it at home. But I will also say that there are 1,000 videos about it online. So if you just go to Google and type in sit and rise test, you can get, we have videos on our own site about this. So you can sort of get a visual if you want to see it. But the basic idea is from a standing position, you cross your legs and slowly with control, lower yourself to the ground. Obviously, if you're going to fall or it's dangerous, you want to do this in a place where, you have a little room, like you could sort of fall backwards, because for some people, this test is very difficult. And if you need to put a hand or a knee down, you can do that. But the goal is to lower yourself to the ground without putting a knee or a hand down on the ground. And then from a cross-legged position, be able to stand back up without putting a knee or hand on the ground. And the researchers scored this out of 10, and every point of contact counted as 1. So if on your way back up, you put one hand down and one knee down, that would be an 8 out of 10, for example. And what they learned is that people who scored below an 8 out of 10, that it was an indicator of overall health and mortality risk. And that your mortality risk increased if you were unable to get up and down off the ground. And this does make logical sense, because if you look at the fall risk in the elderly and how significant it is, if you can reduce your fall risk as you age, you can see how that would increase your chances of living longer, right? So what I love about this test, and we put it as chapter 1 of our book, is that it is such a quick and easy sort of reality check about your mobility that anybody can do at home. Clear out some space on your living room floor, get your kids involved, get your parents involved. I think one of the things we tried to do in our book is sort of create these objective measures, because, everybody knows, for example, that you need to eat fruits and vegetables. That's obvious. Everyone knows that. But how much?
Well, in this
how
day
often?
and age, sometimes, the
right.
shirtless guy.
Right. And then you have an influencer telling you that bananas are toxic, right? So, I mean, it's very complicated. Yeah. But we wanted in our book to create sort of a really quick, simple, free test that anybody can do at home to just get a baseline of their mobility. Now, what I can tell you is this test, you do not need to have full hip or ankle range of motion to be able to do this test. It doesn't require that, as you know from doing it yourself. But nevertheless, it does give you a good indication of kind of where you are, especially with respect to your hip and ankle mobility. You get a little bit of good information. And then to sort of play off of that test, the way to get better at the test is to sit on the floor. And I cannot espouse the benefits of sitting on the floor more. If people take nothing away from this episode, please, I hope everybody remembers to sit on the floor for 30 minutes a day. And there are a lot of different ways you can do that. Many of us are lucky enough to be able to work from home. So if I had a hidden camera, on high speed watching me throughout my workday, for example, What you would see is that I spend part of my time standing at my standing desk. I actually do spend part of my day sitting in a chair. When I need to do deep work, I find that I can focus better just sitting in a chair. I will sit on the floor for part of my day on my laptop. If I'm not able to sit on the floor during my workday, I sit on the floor at night while I'm watching TV or while I'm reading a book. And what I love about sitting on the floor is it's this way of like rewilding your hips. All of this time that we are all spending sitting, which is a lot, we know, our joints are all at 90-degree angles and we're getting stiff and sore. And that's part of the reason why sitting on the floor is really uncomfortable for most people and why the sit and rise test can be very challenging for people. And the other thing I love about it is in a way it's passive, because back to your very first question, I get it. Mobility is often the first thing people are crossing off their lists, right? We've been told we have to do 9,000 things to take care of our health.
I do it too. Like, let me be just very transparent. If I have to choose between mobility and leg day, I'm going to choose leg day.
You're going to do leg day.
Yeah,
and I mean, I own a mobility company and I'm exactly the same, by the way.
Yeah.
I mean, I am the same. Like I have a strong desire to exercise and train. I'm a busy working mom like you. At some point I have to make compromises. But what I love about sitting on the floor is that it is a thing that I can do for my mobility while I'm doing something else.
Yeah.
So I can do it while I'm working, or if I'm watching a movie with my family, I can sit on the floor. So if you come into our house at night, if anybody's watching TV, you'll see everybody's kind of sitting on the floor in front of the couch. We of course have a couch, and sometimes someone will be sitting on the couch, but oftentimes we're transferring between a chair and the floor, the couch and a floor. And the other thing that's so great about sitting on the floor is that your body naturally changes positions. You'll sit in a cross-legged position. You'll all of a sudden find yourself sort of uncomfortable in that position. So you change positions into 90-90, you long sit, you can kneel. And all those positions are like a passive hip mobility workout, so to speak. And the other thing that's so great about sitting on the floor in terms of compliance with doing a mobility practice is that we also, like many people listening to this, have a basket of mobility tools sitting in our living room in front of our TV. And I find that if I've just, taken a moment to sit on the floor and I'm sitting cross-legged and I look to my right and I'm like, oh, there's the foam roller. Well, I'm already down here. I'm going to go ahead and just foam roll my calves because I just did, a bunch of squats today. So I find that just the act of like literally forcing myself to sit on the floor has a cascading positive benefit in terms of my habits. I'm way more likely to actually mobilize. I am, I will tell you that after a hard leg day or hard workout, if I actually sit on the floor for half an hour, my hips and low back feel so much better. And it is just this practice that I think is so simple that all humans should be doing. And, if I get it, it's difficult to do a more formal mobility practice and get out the tools and foam roll and use balls. And sometimes mobility work can be really painful too. So it's like not always a thing you want to do at the end of a hard day. But sitting on the floor, you get so much bang for your buck. And then the other thing that's great about sitting on the floor is you have to get at least once a day. You get one rep of getting down onto the floor and getting back up off of the floor. So you're getting like one rep each day of practicing that. And, just to emphasize again, the one thing you need to know is that in cultures where people sit on the floor, eat on the floor, toilet on the floor, their incidence of low back pain goes way down. Their incidences of joint replacements go down, and the fall risk in the elderly is nearly zero. So for all the people who are never, ever, ever going to pick up a mobility practice, which is probably like 50% of the people listening to this podcast, just sit on the floor for 30 minutes or an hour every day. I swear your hips and low back will thank you.
I have now 5 questions that have come from that, which is just, first of all, fantastic. I was actually doing this yesterday. We have a couch that has a little, I guess, like a chaise on it. So there's like a little extended part. And you mentioned 90-90. So I'll just say like, that's one of my favorite stretches for my quads and for my inner. So you basically are putting 2 legs almost like, opposite of each other. And we'll put some links in the show notes for everybody to give them a visual idea. But each knee is bent at 90, and you can can sort of bend backwards if you're trying to stretch the quad a little bit. You can turn into it if you're trying to get the adductors, or you're trying to get the adductors, or like the inner thigh muscles. It's fantastic.
It's almost kind of like I think the way it was described to us in the 80s, it was like the hurdler stretch a little bit. Like it's almost like a hurdler, right? Like it's a little bit, but I agree with you. I mean, that position, if I had been hitting it hard from a, strength standpoint or riding my mountain bike a lot, and I spend some time in 90-90, I feel so much better.
Yeah, I love that. So questions, I have a couple questions. So what I would do in practice, particularly for it was more for my geriatric population who were much more frail, and we weren't even testing the sitting on the floor. I would start them on a chair, and they'd usually be by something if they needed to just sort of hold on if they lost their sense of balance. Would you recommend chair, unassisted sitting up from a chair, and then progressing down to sitting on the floor? Or would you say actually just get rid of the chair, just start getting like maybe some assistance or starting to get them to go on the floor? And then the other question I had was, on the floor, I typically cross my right leg in and my left leg is on top. Is there any, and of course, when I was doing your sit-up challenge, like it was much easier for me on the right side than it was on the left. So is there any benefit? I actually feel really weird when I cross left over right. So should we also be mindful of crossing our feet the other way? So there's two questions.
So I'll answer the second question first, which is yes. It is ideal just to kind of keep changing positions. And I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's because we all just were sitting crisscross applesauce like little kids and we had a way we did it. Because I'm like you, my right leg is always on the outside and my left leg is tucked in.
Yeah.
So I think anybody who tries this, especially if you haven't been sitting on the floor, you'll see that one side is more stiff than the other side. And so that is definitely worthy of practicing. And, the thing with this floor sitting is it's all about the freestyle. And what I love is that your body will tell you when you've sort of been in a position for too long. And so you naturally switch positions, and you can also, when you're sitting cross-legged, you can like pull your neck to the side and add in stretches and try to reach forward. And I mean, you can just sort of be active in this floor sitting position. And it just is so impactful. Now, on the sit and rise test, I am definitely a fan of scaling this. If you feel at all nervous about this test, the first order of business would be to try it out on a chair or even your coffee table. Usually coffee tables are like a little bit lower than a regular chair.
Right.
And for whatever reason, people seem to kind of know, they have a sense of their own mobility and balance. And they know if they feel nervous about just lowering themselves to the ground, if you feel that sense of nerves, then you're someone who should try it on a scaled basis first. So lowering yourself to a chair or a coffee table. And then for people who struggle with this, one of the other ways to keep practicing it is to put, lower yourself onto a pillow, or, if you're in your gym, onto a couple of like low weight plates or an ab mat, or just something that elevates your rear end a little bit off the ground. And that's a great way to practice the test, because sometimes for people, you just can't, you don't have the mobility to do it from directly off the ground. But if you just add a little bit of height to it and practice that for a few weeks, and you'll find you can lower and lower and eventually be able to do it getting up and down off the ground. And, for people who are really uncomfortable with sitting on the floor and are really sort of far away from this, it may take 3 to 6 months to get to the point where you can comfortably do this. But I can tell you, we published Built to Move in April 2023, and the amount of people we've had reach out to us and say, when I was gifted this book or bought this book and tried this test, I thought there was no way I would ever be able to do this. And lo and behold, 6 months, 8 months, a year later, I can do this test. And what I think is so important for your listeners to know is that we've all heard, because we're on the internet, that, especially those of us perimenopause and menopausal women, that our bone density is going to decrease. And it's going to decrease even if we do all the right things like lifting weights and eating protein and doing all the things that our bone density is going to go down, and that our goal is just to try to limit that reality. And the same thing with our muscle mass. But unlike those two things, your mobility actually does not have to change as you age. And it's not too late. You can improve. I mean, the same goes for strength training, of course. I saw this great post yesterday where someone said, am I too late to strength train? To which the person said, well, are you alive? And the person said, yes. And then the coach said, well, then you're not, it's not too late for you to start strength training.
Are you alive?
Are you alive? And the same is true for mobility work. If you're still alive, it's not too late.
Yeah.
You can continue to improve and impact your mobility and balance and range of motion and strength until the end. So it's not too late.
I love it. I often say, like, the best time was 10 years ago. The second best time is today. It's like, just do something. Yeah. The other thing I will add to this, one of the things that I like to do when we're watching TV in the evening as a family or whatever, is I like to get into the little corner. So my little couch has that chaise lounge. There's like a little V there. And I like to squish myself in there and do the splits. So I will also, not that I used to be able to do splits when I was a gymnast, but not quite at 180 degrees yet. But I feel such a beautiful stretch in my adductors, which are often very tight after a leg day or a couple of days of leg days in the week. And it feels, initially you're like, oh my God, it's so tight. And then you're sitting there and you're like, oh, I feel everything sort of opening up a little bit. It's wonderful. And I do it at soccer practice too. That's the other thing I'll do.
Yeah, and that's one of those positions. Like, I do the same thing because I have the tightest adductors. Like, you would actually be like, dude, your adductors are so tight. But I do that too. I get into like my version of the splits. And again, if I wasn't already sitting on the floor, I would never do that. But it's just part of my routine. I'll watch like a whole hour-long TV show with my husband and sit on the floor the whole time. And I'm adopting 20 different positions, including the splits in 90-90. And I feel so much better. And the other way I feel so much better is when I get up the next day to train, I really notice a difference on the nights where I have these nights, I'm a human being. I have these nights where I'm like, I can't deal. I just have to lay on the couch. Like, I'm done as a human. Can't do anything active. I lay on the couch. And that's fine. But I notice it the next day in the gym in terms of my range of motion when I'm trying to, squat or whatever movement I'm trying to do. I can tell that I feel a little more stiff, that I might need to spend a bit more time warming up. And so I can really see the downstream impact of not doing it once I start doing it a lot. The other thing I will say, and I think it's one of the most awesome things that is happening in fitness now, and that is that so many more women are trying strength and conditioning training. And that is a big like high five out there, right? There's a lot of dumb stuff that happens in our industry, and that is just a net positive across the board. It makes me so happy to see that. And what I will say is that a really good, thoughtful strength and conditioning program is also a form of a mobility program, because a thoughtful strength and conditioning program is going to make sure that your major joints, what we call archetypes, are being accounted for. So can you squat? Can you hinge? Can you put your arm over your head? Does your workout include a pull, a push, a hinge, an overhead move, a single leg move, like a single leg balance? The sort of like A+ move would be a pistol squat. But a really thoughtful strength and conditioning program is actually taking into consideration, in fact, maybe the basis of the program is making sure that you're hitting all the shapes with those strength moves. And then when you add load to those positions, it's actually challenging your range of motion. So I think that's another sort of like underappreciated piece of strength training. And the only critique I would have is that there's a lot of strength programs that don't take your range of motion into consideration and are missing sort of key ranges of motion in their strength training. If you're just doing like sort of what you'd think of as like classic, like bro
splits,
bicep curl kind of movements. But a really thoughtful strength and conditioning program can also act as a mobility program, in my opinion, because you're taking your joints through full ranges of motion, and under load, you can often get into ranges of motion that you can't do when you're not loaded. For example, my biggest mobility challenge is lack of ankle range of motion. I had a really bad ankle sprain when I was in high school, and it's been like a real challenge for me. I have terrible ankle range of motion. And for me, it's all about just like keeping what I've got and trying not to lose more. That's my lifelong goal as an adult. But the best way for me to challenge my ankle range of motion is squatting, because I actually have load on my back. I can actually get my, it forces me to challenge my dorsiflexion in a way that's actually really hard to do in a mobility practice because I'm not under load. So, there's just 1,001 reasons why strength and conditioning or strength training is amazing. And one of the side benefits is this, is that if done right, you actually are challenging your range of motion.
I love what you're saying. And it's so, I agree with you. A well-considered or a well-planned strength and conditioning program will include mobility, even if it's your warm-up sets, right? So it's not just, hey, get on the elliptical for 10 minutes and kind of get sweaty. Maybe you want to prime your working squat sets with some squats that just have the barbell, right? So there's a little bit of load. You can control it. It doesn't feel too much. And then you can get into some of these deeper ranges of motion. And then to your point, this is one of the things that I like to talk about is utilizing tempo. So maybe preferentially biasing the eccentric, so preferentially biasing the part of the movement where you are elongating the muscle. And then when you add, and then in that stretch position, in that deep, deep stretch, if you are adding load, well, that's kind of that's mobility there as well as driving strength and hypertrophy as well. If you have that stretch, in that stretch position, if there's load there, there's like you were saying, there's mobility, and you're also getting some of the strength and hypertrophy benefits as well, depending on like rep ranges and all that. But it's sort of like a 2-for-1, which is also really nice.
It really is a 2-for-1. I mean, honestly, if we got all perimenopausal, menopausal women doing a thoughtful strength and conditioning program, sitting on the floor for 30 minutes or an hour a day and getting up and down off the floor to do that, like that already is you're doing more mobility work than 95% of people.
Yeah.
And then the way to think about adding mobility work in is, what we suggest is be curious about what's going on in your body. Do you find in your workouts that, your overhead position is stiff, or that you're like, in my case, your ankles are stiff, or you feel like you're sort of struggling with a little bit of low back pain? So be curious about your own body. And that's where to focus your more complex mobility work. There's so much you can do with a foam roller and a ball and a few simple tools on your living room floor. And the other thing I'll say is we have this idea about, which I think is one of the most powerful lessons to be learned in sort of understanding a mobility practice. And that is this idea of upstream and downstream, which you're going to understand so well as a chiropractor. But we often have, let's just use knee pain as example. We have a ton of people come to see us with knee pain. And let me just make clear, we're not talking about an ACL tear. If you've got an ACL tear, you need to go into the medical system and do the thing, right? But if you're alive and using your body, strength training, playing sports, being physically active, there's a good chance at some point you're just going to have like a non-specific knee pain. Like, what's going on with my knee? Like, my knee just feels a little tweaked in pain or whatever. Or, same thing for any of your other joints, your shoulder, your low back, you name it. We have found, and people sometimes can't believe this, it's so simple, but we suggest to people that, if you've got knee pain or shoulder pain, like what muscles and tendons and tissues and, other things going on are upstream and downstream of the joint that is bothering you. So if it's your knee, if you come home from a workout and you've just got some sort of niggling knee pain, and again, this isn't something that requires you to go get an MRI and see the doctor, you just sort of feel stiff and your knee's kind of tight, work upstream and downstream. Get a foam roller, lacrosse ball, any other kind of tool, and feed your knee a little bit of slack, because oftentimes we see that these sort of like nagging pain and injuries that we have as adults who are doing things with our bodies can literally be solved with just a little bit of attention to the upstream and downstream tissues. And people don't often believe us because it seems oversimplified that that's actually going to work. But the amount of people that we've, who've come to us with knee pain and we're like, hey, do the couch stretch for 6 minutes a day and foam roll your quads. And 2 weeks later, they're like, oh my God, my knee pain's gone. There's a lot of those people. Yeah, so, again, sit on the floor and then be curious. If your joints are bothering you and that this isn't a catastrophe that requires medical intervention, be curious and work on your body upstream and downstream, and see if you can't feed that area a little bit of slack and make some change, because pain is usually a request for change. And if you rethink pain that way, again, not catastrophe, but just sort of the everyday pain that we're all experiencing, pain's a request for change. So be curious about what you can change. Oftentimes there's missing range of motion. There's just stiffness in the muscles around the joint. There's a lot of things you can do on your living room floor to just take a crack at fixing your own pain. And I think that's the best use case of a mobility program. Rather than telling yourself, I got to do this mobility work every single day, or I'm going to end up in a sniff. That's, again, not that motivating. And again, like all of us, we cross it off the list. But if you sit on the floor for 30 minutes or an hour a day, and if you are curious about some of your stiffness and pain and take a crack at trying to work on yourself a little bit, to me, those are the two best ways to incorporate a mobility practice into your life.
I have to say, I really appreciate the words that you're using, particularly curious, because it also implies without judgment. And I think that for the perimenopause, I think women in general, but our cohort of perimenopausal and menopausal women, I think at least I can say my own experience, incredibly hard on myself. Some obscure diet that was made by a man for men doesn't work for me, or some program doesn't work for me. And I'm like, you know what the problem is? It's right here. It's like, I'm the problem. It's me. Hi, I'm the problem. And I think that I just wanted to highlight that, because you've said it a couple of times in such a non-judgmental way. And I think just, we could use more of that. So thank you for using that word. Yeah.
Thank you. And man, we sure are hard on ourselves at this time of our life, right? It is we're going through this huge shift and change, and it is, we really don't do ourselves any favors sometimes, just in terms of how we speak to ourselves.
Yeah.
And I'll give you an example too. I was recently just my rotator cuff felt kind of tweaked. And I do a lot of strength and conditioning training. It could have been 1,000 different things I did. I'm sure I moved in a crappy position or who knows what. But my brain, because I'm a menopausal woman, went immediately to catastrophe, like, oh crap.
It's frozen
shoulder. Is this the beginning of frozen shoulder, right?
God, I knew
immediately.
It. Yes.
Like, I immediately went to there. I was like, oh, and then I sort of like, I in my mind, like I hadn't even gotten home from the gym, and I'd already gone down this path where I was like, well, now I'm that person. I'm the frozen shoulder person, and frozen shoulder's now my identity. Like, this is between like leaving the gym and the 20-minute drive back to my house. I'd already like changed my entire personality to be frozen shoulder.
And what a failure I am. Aren't I supposed to be the mobility person?
Right, exactly. Yeah, exactly. This can't happen to me.
Yeah.
And I went into the house and I said, Kelly, I think I have frozen shoulder. And he, of course, was like, he actually kind of laughed because he knew. And he said, well, what's bothering you? And I said, well, my rotator cuff. And so he suggested that, I spend some time working on my traps and my T-spine. He's like, I know your T-spine is so stiff. And when's the last time you mobilized your T-spine? And I was like, oh, maybe it's been a few weeks. But I took a step back, mobilized my T-spine, put a lacrosse ball into my traps. I did that for a couple weeks, and goodbye rotator cuff pain. And it turns out I don't have frozen shoulder.
Right.
But it did take an outside person sort of taking me off the ledge. And so, to the extent that anybody listening, you can try to do that for yourself, which is say, okay, before I go into catastrophe mode, as a perimenopausal woman, it's easy to do that because, that's where our brains are. And instead say, okay, I'm feeling a little bit of pain. How can I be curious about this? What can I do? Let me see if I can make some change. This is just a request for change. That's it.
Pain is just a request for change. That's wonderful. Let's build on the squat. So we were talking about squatting just a few moments ago. One of the things that I do to try and incorporate mobility into my life without having a formal mobility program is when I'm watching my boys at their soccer game. So it's like I got to get them an hour before the game is there. They do their warm-ups and then the game starts. So it's like 90 minutes or whatever. They have bleachers, which of course are terrible, just awful for
Terrible.
I can't. So what I will do is I will get on the low, like I'll, kind of have a little spot on the low bleacher, but then I will get on the floor into a squat and then just use the bleacher to keep me up, because I'll fall backwards or whatever, or I can use it to kind of like roll out an area like that, the hard metal bleacher.
Yeah,
I'll
you can
sort
get your T-spine or whatever.
Exactly,
yes.
exactly. So let's talk a little bit about, so we've been talking about sitting on the floor. I wanted to talk about maybe incorporating squat position into daily living a couple times a week. Obviously, it's like all the things we've been, it helps you master your squat. So you're getting hip flexion, you're getting knee flexion, a little bit of external rotation in the hip, you're getting ankle, like the dorsiflexion mobility in there. Talk to us about what are some of the ways that why we want to consider sitting in that deep squat. And you'd mentioned other cultures, Indian culture, Japanese culture, I'll throw in like Middle Eastern culture, lots of sitting on the floor, squatting on the floor. Why would this be something that we might want to consider? And then maybe build on some examples in everyday life that we can think about getting into a squatting position. Maybe it's a sitting on the floor at the end of the night with the family, or other ways that you or your clients have discovered.
So I'll start by saying that, every physician and expert on the world sort of agrees that your joints are supposed to be able to do certain things. They're supposed to have certain ranges of motion. And sitting in what's called an ass to grass squat, which is just a full squat with your heels on the ground, is normal range of motion.
Hamstrings
now,
on calves,
most of us,
kind of thing, right?
Hamstrings on calves.
Yeah.
Most of us do not have normal range of motion when it comes to the squat. And honestly, through no fault of our own. We probably all were able to do a full ass to grass squat when we were little kids, but our environment is not set up to promote being able to do that motion. Our environments are set up for us to be sitting most of the time. A lot of us have to commute for work or have jobs that require us to sit a lot. And so it's just not a motion that is done on the regular basis in our culture. Our culture is not set up to be in the squat position, but the ability to do a full squat is first of all, it really is such an eye into your general range of motion, just like the sit and rise test. But the thing that I'll compare it to is low back pain. Low back pain is a giant scourge in our society. I mean, the amount of money and time, anybody who's had low back pain, and low back pain is different from this other kind of pain I've been talking about. Anytime you have pain that's connected to your nervous system, as you know, it's different. It's completely different than shoulder pain. If you have shoulder pain, you still might think to yourself, I can go to the gym and I'll just work out with my legs, even though I have shoulder pain, or, any of your other limbs. But because low back pain is connected to your nervous system, your brain freaks out and really tells you to turn off. And one of the predictors of low back pain is, the loss of range of motion and the inability to get into that squat position. So, again, I don't think injury prevention is super motivating for people, just like not ending up in a sniff. But for anybody who's had low back pain, they're going to know that, if there was anything they could have done to avoid having low back pain, and that is simply just practicing a squat every so often, they would have been like, sign me up when I'm 20 so that I don't have to experience this now. So there are so many ways, though, that we can incorporate this into our life. I mean, again, the sit and rise test is sort of a modified version of a squat, but we have in our book this thing we call the squat challenge. And it is literally just squatting to a chair. And on day 1, you do this once. And then on day 2, you squat and get up twice. And then day 3, you squat and get up 3 times. And then as you practice this, the goal is to try to lower the chair. So can you have a chair, and then can you lower down to a little ottoman or to a coffee table? And then can you lower down a little more? But just incorporating, 1 to 10 squats every day into your life can make a huge difference in your ability to achieve and maintain this position, this sort of key position that the human body is supposed to be doing. I also have a friend, Dr. Marilee Opezzo, she does research at Stanford on exercise snacks, which are effective, by the way. And she's found that just getting up from your desk once an hour and doing 10 squats can sort of make a major difference in your overall health metrics. So that's just getting up and doing 10 air squats. They don't even need to be ass to grass squats. They can be squats in whatever range of motion you have. Those make a major difference in your sort of overall health picture. So, and that's again, not like another huge to-do list. That's just like, okay, I'm getting up to go get coffee. I'm just going to do my 10 air squats next to my desk real quick. And then I also love what you're doing, being creative with it, which is like you're at your kid's game. You've got time to kill. Do some air squats, get down into a squat position. Even if you have to squat with your heels up off the ground because you're lacking that range of motion, that's also a great thing to practice. Yep. And that's something I practice almost every day. The other thing I'd recommend if people want to invest in sort of practicing their squat is get a slant board. If you can't achieve a full squat position, get a slant board, put on some Olympic lifting shoes, give yourself a little bit of assistance. You can also just hang on to something and squat and really touch that full squat range of motion. And, your joints and tissues are going to thank you, and you're going to reduce your risk of low back pain, and you're going to be able to really see the difference in your ability to squat with weight in the gym and be able to get full range of motion in your squat in the gym. So, we're big fans of squatting, and I'll tell everybody, it's the most difficult position for me because of my lack of ankle dorsiflexion. So it's something I have to keep my eye on. I am squatting in some form or fashion every single day.
Yeah. And I
just to hang on to that.
The funny thing is too, is I was taught in school, of course, now, class of 2003, it's, this is a little bit coming into outdated information, but we were always taught never train the knee over the toes, below 90.
Don't go below 90.
Yeah, don't go, it's like too much stress on the ligaments of the knee, et cetera. And of course, now we know that, again, when you train in unstable positions, you actually become more stable. Like, who would have thought, right? It's so fun. Sometimes common sense, not so common, even with our teachers. Like we were taught this, and I was an aerobic instructor paying for my way through chiropractic college, doing the step classes, doing all the things. And
yes.
in my certification,
I just want to shout out to step aerobics. I was so into it for a while. Sorry, I have to shout that out.
I'm still into it. There is a step class at my gym, and I love it. I love it. It's my soul food. I love it.
This is a real side, but I follow a guy who does I follow him on Instagram, these amazing step classes.
I think we follow the same person.
Okay.
Yes.
I forget his handle, but I'm obsessed with him. He's African-American.
Yes.
He does, recently he just posted his whole group doing this Michael Jackson song. I mean, I watched that and I was like, I need to go to that class. And I would be terrible. Like, these people are so coordinated and such good dancers.
Yes.
And it looks so fun.
I think we are following the same person, and I forget his handle as well. And I'm going
to send you the next time I see him.
Send it to me on Instagram. I think, and you know what? I think I've stalked them enough that I figured out some of the characters. Like, I think that the woman in the front is like his wife or his girlfriend. There's one girl.
I think I found him. Is his name Julius Burfee?
I think it is.
I think that's it.
Yeah. And I'm convinced that a few people he has around him are like former professional dancers because they're so good.
Yeah.
They're so good.
Yeah. We got to bring step back, man. Like a step. And I got to like rehab for the knee, right? It's like small little bursts of leg extension. If you have VMO weakness, like vastus medialis, like all of that weakness, it's so, so good for it. So love
So
step.
Can I add something else though about the squatting before your son's game?
Yes.
So I've been talking about this for years, and I'm obsessed with that specific period of time, especially for this age group of women. Many of us have kids in youth sports, and many of us are driving somewhere and then getting stuck out there with time to kill. And so I've started this thing, and in fact, it's become so common that, I love that you're squatting, and I'm gonna borrow that if you don't mind, but I have a thing where I would get to the game and, your kid needs to warm up. So you have at least an hour, and usually we're at some high school. So I would just go out onto the track and start walking because I'm obsessed with walking. Yep. And what's been so cool is my kids play water polo. What's been so cool now is that I've gotten this whole group of other parents in with me. So now we don't even text about it. We all just show up. We all pull into the parking lot an hour before our kids' games, and everybody gets out of the car and they're like, should we walk? And it's a group of like 10 of us parents. And, if we are at a high school where there's a track, we'll walk around the track. If we're just in some random neighborhood, we'll walk the neighborhood. I mean, it doesn't matter where we are. It's just this given that we're going to arrive and get out of our cars and walk. And usually before our kids' game, we're all getting in like 5,000 steps at a track or walking around a neighborhood or whatever. And it's a great time for us all to talk and connect. And, the alternative is what most parents are doing, which is either sitting in their cars looking at their phones or going into the, game early and sitting in a really uncomfortable stadium seat or in their lawn chair or whatever. So to me, like as a mom, especially a sports mom, like that hour is like this critical time where you can really just do something to nurture your own self. You can walk, you can go sit on the grass and sit crisscross applesauce 90-90. You can squat the way you're doing it. It's like that hour can be this time where you really do something for yourself versus just feeling like you're like, wow, I'm a prisoner in my car in this parking lot in some random high school, who knows where, and I'm going to spend, an hour looking at Instagram. So I love that you're doing the squatting thing, and the next time I'm at a game, I'm doing that.
I love that. I'm so happy you said that because I do the same thing. So I will walk if it's like depends on the weather. I'm on the East Coast. So if it's winter, I'm not walking the neighborhood, but what I'll do is I will challenge myself to see how many lunges I can get in before the game starts. Just on the sideline, nobody cares. Nobody's watching. It's like the team before.
They might think you're a little weird, but who cares?
Well, it's like the hour before, it's not even families that I know. It's like some other soccer game with some other parent, like it's some other group. So I'll just do lunges on the side inside the track or inside the stadium before the game starts. And I will challenge myself to see how many single leg, alternating lunges or whatever I can do before the game starts if I'm not walking. But the walking is so great. And then you can also, what I started doing is I just put a weighted vest in the trunk, and then you can put the weighted vest on if you want to amp up the walking a little bit. I mean, nobody cares, right? Like that's the other thing
Nobody
too,
cares.
is everyone is like, oh my God, are people watching me do these lunges? I mean, maybe they start watching you. And then what I've had people, kind of maybe give me a side eye or whatever, but other people are like, oh my God, that's such a good idea. Right?
Yeah. And then they want to join you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing is like, I was just like, hey, where are we walking? When are we walking? And now the fact that it's just a given, like nobody texts in advance. Nobody's like, are we walking? Everybody's just like, get out the car and where are we walking?
Fantastic.
That's the question.
Fantastic.
It's so cool.
Okay. So actually just with squatting. So one of the big questions that I get, because I'll put a squat, I'll do the ATG squats or whatever, ass to the grass squats. And someone will invariably comment on Instagram, I can't go that low. I have insert arthritide here, insert, injury here, right? Low back pain, knee pain, etc. Would you say maybe for someone who can't do an ass to the grass squat, maybe it's like the axial loading, like if it's a barbell squat or a Smith squat or something, maybe that's the exacerbator. Would you say, hey, can we move where the load is? Like maybe it's dumbbells or maybe it's like a belt loaded squat if your gym has the facility or whatever. If somebody doesn't, let's say, if they can't take the axial loading on the spine for whatever reason, what are some of the considerations for alternatives that we can provide for people?
Yeah. So the first thing I will say is that I do think it's a myth that, especially when you're squatting with load, that you're not going to get anything out of it unless you can do an ass to grass squat. I mean, I think even, we really are all about movement quality, as you know, and we want people to be squatting or doing whatever movement they're doing with good form.
Yep.
And if your form deteriorates once you start to go below 90, then we're going to coach you and say, hey, actually, you're someone who needs to stay at 90 or above 90. And we'll just have somebody squatting with load and not getting into their full range of motion. And they're still getting a ton of benefit from that squat. And they're still building muscle and practicing their range of motion and getting all the benefits of squatting. The other option is, like I mentioned, I think it's okay, especially, so let's say you have someone who just can't squat, but they can hold the barbell. And that would be me, for example. I don't have full ankle range of motion. It's hard for me to ass to grass squat. So there are a couple ways that you can support yourself in doing that. I mean, one of them is investing in a pair of Olympic lifting shoes. It just gives you a little bit of a high heel and can help you just get another inch or two of range of motion in your squat in a way that can be really meaningful. There's a tool I love. I have literally no connection affiliation with them whatsoever, so I'm not selling it at all. It's called a wolf wedge, and it's this really simple wedge that you can put your ankles on while you're squatting that will allow you to get more range of motion in your squat move. You can also use different slant boards. There's a ton of products like this. I really like the wolf wedge because it's cheap and on Amazon, and I have like one at my work gym and one at my home gym. But there's no reason why you can't give yourself a little extra room there if, like in my case, ankle range of motion is a problem, so that you can touch that full or closer to ass to grass squat position. So that'd be number one. And then number two, there's so many other ways to get that practice without a barbell. We see a lot of people really struggle with a regular traditional back squat position. And it's not even that they have a spine problem. It's literally that they're lacking, shoulder range of motion. So there's lots you can do to improve your shoulder range of motion so you can hold a barbell. But that would be a whole separate conversation.
Yeah, that's part two. That's part two of this conversation.
But I think, we're huge fans of front squatting. First of all, we think front squatting doesn't get enough cred because front squatting really does take a lot of that shoulder, T-spine, upper back range of motion out of the picture. So number one, huge fan of front squatting. Huge fan of putting your heels up on something like a wolf wedge or a slant board or something so you can get a little extra range of motion. And then apart from that, yes to dumbbell front squats, goblet squats, any other kind of implement. I mean, we're, for whatever reason, I don't know if it's because we're old, but like we're really into sandbags these days. We love sandbags and we love sandbag squatting. We think sandbags are such an easy, simple thing to have in a home gym, for example. So, you can just hold a sandbag in front of your body and squat that way.
Yeah, that's a front squat.
It's a front squat.
Yeah. For sure,
so
another one would be a Zercher squat, like where you're holding in the front, sort of. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I have a good friend who has a frozen wrist from a skateboarding injury when he was a kid. So he really can't hold a barbell because his wrist doesn't bend. And so he is like Mr. Zercher squat. So there's so many creative ways you can get into a squat position. And I am not dogmatic at all about the traditional ATG barbell back squat. And the other final thing I'll say about squatting is huge fan of box squatting. Even front squat box squatting.
That's so good.
There's so much you can get out of a box squat. And for a lot of people, squatting is scary. I've been squatting my entire life and I know how to bail out of a squat. It's just something that I feel very comfortable with. But what I found working with people who are new to squatting, that it can be sort of an unsure position. And especially when you start adding load. But box squatting is what I think one of the best ways to actually get people loading more than they think, because it just limits your range of motion. It's a little bit of a safer position. You have to get up out of that seated position. So there's so many ways to modify squatting but still keep squatting in your program that, almost everybody can and should be doing some form of squatting, but there's literally 1,000 ways to do it. And I am never going to be dogmatic about like, it doesn't count unless you're doing this serious, like real, ATG back squat. Like, I don't agree with that at all. There's 1,000 ways you can get the benefits of squatting.
I could not have said it better myself, and I agree 100% with what you're saying. You're right. Front squats and Zerchers, they don't get the love that they should. They don't. No. And I don't even know why. Now that you're saying it. I remember for a time Smith squats, like people were like, ugh, fake.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I love
fake. And I'm even like, I have no problem with a Smith machine. Like
I love them.
I'm like, I'm like, look, again, so many people are brand new to weightlifting. So the worst thing we can do in this industry is like create environments where people are scared to do these things they know they're supposed to be doing. And if a Smith machine provides a level of safety and security for people, I'm all for it.
Yeah.
Like, that's great.
I was using them this morning.
Again, it's like, huge fan. And nowadays, by the way, there are like these little pads you can put on your bar to hold the Zercher squat. I remember when I first started Zercher squatting, it was like 2005. And I was like, okay, that's fine. But like my elbow is dying right now. But now you can get these lovely little pads and you can Zercher squat and,
you don't need to grate the skin on your elbow anymore. No, it doesn't need to be grated cheese. Yeah, no. I love that. That's so good. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the center of gravity. And so we've been talking about perimenopause and menopause. Obviously, that's the audience. Our center of gravity in midlife changes a little bit. We have this anterior head carriage from being on our phones. We have this thoracic sort of rounding and internal rotation of the shoulder. talk to us a little bit about just in terms of the mechanics. This is for my nerds. So we categorize our Betties, if you will, that listen to the Better podcast. Light roast Betties, who are just like, tell me what to do. Medium roast Betties, tell me what to do and just give me a little bit of reason about why. And then the dark roasters are like, tell me the mechanism. Tell me the enzyme that drives this process. So talk to us a little bit, and this is a dark roast question. How does the center of gravity in midlife change, and how can that affect mechanics in squatting?
I think the two biggest things are a really stiff T-spine, which we mentioned before when we were talking about holding a barbell, and lack of hip extension. And my husband, Kelly, is so obsessed with hip extension that we literally talk about it at the dinner table. And he is of the mind that the lack of hip extension is like why people are in pain, generally speaking.
Yeah.
So I'll talk first about hip extension, just to maybe totally oversimplify it. Most of the time these days, because of our environment, our hips are in flexion because we are sitting so much of our days. And on top of that, we're doing a lot of fitness in hip flexion, like Peloton, for example. Everybody got a Peloton in COVID, which I totally understand why, because that was what we could do. And I'm a mountain biker. I love biking, so I am spending time in a biking position. But if you're spending all your day sitting and then, sitting in a chair, with your joints at 90-degree angles and especially your hip inflection, and then your main workout is, going to a spinning class or getting on a Peloton, that's more hip flexion.
Or elliptical.
And
elliptical.
Or elliptical.
Yeah.
There's so many ways in which we're just in flexion all the time.
Yeah.
And so what we are really missing as humans is hip extension, which is, as Kelly likes to say, knee behind butt. So we're putting our hip into extension in a lot of everyday motions. Walking is hip extension, running is hip extension, lunging is putting your hip into hip extension. One of the exercises we love is a simple lunge isometric. In fact, anytime I'm in line for any reason, if I have to wait in line, I put myself into a little mini lunge isometric, which is, you can just imagine you put yourself into a lunge position, but not an extreme lunge, like a kind of short lunge, so you don't look like a weirdo in the grocery store line, but like a mini lunge. And then you want to be squeezing the butt cheek that's in the back. So whichever knee is behind your butt, you're squeezing that butt cheek. And it's amazing that even in, waiting in line, you can really feel how tight your hip flexors are and your quads, and you can really feel a big difference in that whole entire chain just from doing a simple lunge isometric. I also do lunge isometrics almost every day at the end of my workout. I just do 30 seconds aside times 2. I just get into a lunge isometric. And then the other real way to get a real test that is a painful test is to do something we call the couch test. And we, again, if you go on the internet, it's called the couch stretch or couch test. And it's hard to describe in audio format, but basically you put your knee up against the wall in the corner of the wall or corner of your couch, and your calf is sort of going up there. Your shin is going up the wall, and then you bring your other knee up. So you're kind of in a lunge shape, but your knee is on the ground behind you. It's hard to describe, but this is the true test of hip extension, is the couch test. And what I can tell you is that people pay a lot of money to fly across the country, and I'm going to bring it up again, to see Kelly for things like back pain or knee pain. And the first thing he does with people is put them into the couch test. So again, we have people who've flown across the country because they're convinced that Kelly is going to cure them and save them, and that he's going to clap his hands together and rub them together and like sprinkle dust over them and save them from these challenges they've been having, and he does a few things. He teaches them how to breathe. He tests their hip extension and tells them to walk more. So this is not rocket science, right? But the ability to have hip extension, again, it can impact low back pain, knee pain, stiff quads, but it can also affect your performance. I mean, you cannot expect to be sitting in hip flexion all the time and then go out for a run, for example, and expect to perform at your best. You need good hip extension. Your knee needs to go really far behind your butt to be able to run with good form, for example. So it really does having no hip extension really does impact your overall performance. And then, T-spine is stiff in everybody. And that's because we're all on our phones. We're all sitting all the time. We all have sort of a forward on head neck position. There's a lot in a mobility practice that is not fun and is painful, I will say. And the couch stretch is one of those things. It is challenging unless you happen to be hypermobile or have been mobilizing your whole life. One of the mobilizations that feels so good is the T-spine mobilization.
Yeah, agreed.
And we have this thing, and again, I have no connection to this company, but I think everyone should have one in their living room. It's called the chirp wheel. And it's just this large circular piece of wide PVC pipe with a little pad on it. And it's just a way to roll out your T-spine in the most effective way. And it feels so good. Like you do it and you're like, I know I need to be doing this because it feels so good on your body. And, it's one of those things too, like, if you can't hold a barbell on your back in a back squat position, chances are that your T-spine is stiff and your shoulders are probably a little bit stiff. And you literally might be able to achieve that position by just paying a little bit of attention to your T-spine and rolling out your T-spine with a chirp wheel, a foam roller. You can do it with 2 lacrosse balls taped together. I mean, there's 1,000 ways to get a really effective T-spine mobilization. But, I recommend, like the sit and rise test, that everybody put themselves through the couch test. Again, look up a video online of how to do it and just get a sense of where you are with your hip extension. And if it's a real struggle for you, the way to get better at it is to do the couch stretch. I do the couch stretch 3 or 4 times a week, 3 minutes per side. So it's not a big commitment. I do it at the end of my workout because like you and everybody else listening, mobility is like the first thing to go off my list. But if I just put in 3 minutes aside at the very end of my workout, I'm way more likely to do it. And, again, if you're on the floor, sitting on the floor, and you happen to have a way to roll out your T-spine, your back is going to thank you for it, and your neck is going to feel so much better.
The way I describe the couch test is it's basically if you've ever been to a group exercise fitness class, at the end they're like, and grab your leg behind and do a quad stretch. It's basically that, but you're pinning the knee on the floor and putting it up against the wall.
That's exactly it.
Yeah. Yeah. And
that's exactly it.
I actually really like it. But what I like about it is it actually shows me I'm very different from left to right. So I will hold my left side needs a little bit longer than my right side. And I can stand on my right. I can get up. I can get upright. Chest is tall and proud. On the left, it's a much slower rise. So it's at the end of that 3 or 4 minutes, I'm like, okay, I feel like I can kind of get up there. But yeah, I agree. It's a fantastic test, but sometimes also the test is also the plan.
Test is the thing. It's the same with the sit and rise test. It's like, that's what I like about it. It's like, let's not keep it complicated. Like, do the test, see where you are, and then do the thing.
Yeah.
Do the thing. You'll see vast benefits in your, general overall range of motion. The couch test also will help you with the sit and rise test if you do that on the regular. And it just has a great performance benefit. I mean, you're going to get better at biking, and you're going to get better at skiing and mountain biking, and you're going to feel like you can hit more range of motion in your squat. I mean, it will have a real performance impact if that's a position that you touch on the regular.
Yeah. Talk to us. You mentioned breathing and you mentioned walking. I think breathing is something, surprisingly, that a lot of people get wrong. Whenever I would, and maybe this is slightly unfair, but I would ask patients take a deep breath, what I would see them do is this. So for those of you listening on audio, shoulders are rising and kind of becoming earrings.
And all of it in the chest.
All in the upper chest. Talk to us about breathing mechanics and why this is even just connected to all of the other things that we've been talking about today, sitting on the floor and squatting and the couch, like all the things that we've been talking. Why is breathing properly important? And I say this because lots of women, we've all been told to hold in our stomachs, right? It's like we suck it all in. So talk to us about why we don't, that's not necessarily the right way to breathe.
Well, I think this is also connected into this. And, you had Philip McEwen on, who's like the master at this. So I'll add what I think can be useful on top of what he had, because he's a brilliant genius. And I'm such a fan of him and follower. But what we've tried to add to this breathing conversation and what we put in our book, Built to Move, is that many people are actually missing the capacity to even take a full breath for a variety of reasons. But they're, because of forward head on neck position, sitting all the time, stiff T-spine, we find a lot of people literally are actually lacking the capacity to even be able to take a full breath. So, any of the upper body mobilizations that we do, we also love to do, Jill Miller, who is a yogi, and I love Jill Miller. She has this ball called the Courageous Ball. And, one of the most important things we do and we think improves our breathing mechanics significantly is to lay on her ball. You can also lay on a volleyball. We call it a trunk mobilization, but this whole front side, this whole, sort of between like your rib cage down through your pelvis, is this part of your body that we definitely ignore, right? From a mobility perspective, we're just sort of like, we all have children and diastasis and, C-sections. And I think it's sort of this thing where we're just like, let's just not even like look at that part of our body, because there's too much going on there.
Or let's slap a waist trainer on it and maybe it'll go away.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So we've found that with some really simple attention to mobility work of the T-spine, the neck, the traps, and trunk mobilizations on a bigger ball, like a volleyball or a Jill Miller Courageous ball, we can actually really sort of create, like if you think of your whole trunk as like a package, we want to be able to expand that package so you actually can take a full breath. And then the other thing we like to do is just, have, when we're all sitting, probably listening to this, and, sit in your normal position and try to take like as big a breath as you can right now. Just go. And then now try to assume a position with your body where you can take like a 1 rep max breath. Like how do you have to change your position to take a 1 rep max breath? So go ahead and organize yourself into that position and then take a 1 rep max breath. So in and out. So without being able to see anyone listening to this, I'll go ahead and bet that everybody sat up, changed their seating position into being much more upright, and actually created the capacity to be able to use the diaphragm and take a real big, huge 1 rep max breath. And, that's the kind of breathing we want to be engaging in. But if we are all the time on our phones, forward head on neck, we don't pay any mind to our upper back T-spine mobility, our trunk mobility, we're just going to be limited in our capacity to actually take in a full breath. And then we get into this pattern of just stress breathing all the time. We're just, we're always taking these little stress breaths, which is sending the signal to the brain that we're stressed all the time. So you may be sitting at your desk and think, I'm not stressed, but you've adopted a position where you can only stress breathe into your chest, and you're sending this message to your brain that your body is under stress. And it can be as simple as adopting a bit of a different position where you can actually take in a full breath that can send a completely different message to your brain. The other thing I'll say about breathing is one of the most annoying things I feel like the fitness business did to women is tell them that we all needed to like wake up at 4:00 in the morning and have this morning routine.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure you feel annoyed by that.
I wrote
too.
a chapter
really
about it in my first book. I was like, morning routines are sexist, full stop.
Full stop. Yeah. I'm like tying my kid's shoe and making them lunch and getting breakfast. And like my morning routine is like maybe guzzling down an espresso shot so that I have the capacity to do those things. And so for me, a real structured breathing practice is also one of those things I cross off the list. If I have time, I will do it, but I rarely have time. So for me, it's like the cross off the list mobility practice. So there's a couple ways I've figured out how to incorporate a bit of a breathing practice into other things I'm doing. So the first thing is, and this was the second part of your question, I am obsessed with walking. I think it's like the single greatest thing people can do. And I believe the number of steps we all need to aim to get is 8,000. And I can talk about that later. But when I am walking, I actually try to incorporate a bit of a breathing practice to my walk. So I will focus on nose only breathing while I'm walking. While I'm walking, I like to walk fast and then walk slow. So I'm not always just walking at the same pace all the time. So I'm just trying to change up how I'm walking. Sometimes I'll breathe in through my nose, out through my mouth. Sometimes while I'm walking, I will breathe in through my nose and then take 10 steps on a breath hold. So there's lots of little things I'm doing while I'm doing other stuff to practice my breathing. And then the other place that I love to just work on my breathing is during my warm-ups for workouts. Because again, I'm already warming up, and let's just say I'm going to do some longer cardio piece. So I need to, sit on a bike for 5 or 10 minutes to warm up. At the top of every minute, I'll take a huge breath in while I'm biking, and I'll do a max breath hold while I'm already warming up. Or I will do my whole warm up with nose only breathing just to practice that skill. So there's lots of little things I'm doing to incorporate attention to my breathing capacity and training my CO2, but that aren't like sitting cross-legged at 6:30 in the morning instead of getting my kids ready for school.
Right.
And
Journaling
doing and formal journaling and doing a formal breathing practice. Like I don't have time for that. Maybe someday I will when I'm retired. And when I do, I will probably incorporate a bit of a more formal breathing practice because I am such a believer and again, like huge fan of Oxygen Advantage and Philip McEwen's work. But right now at this phase of my life, like that's getting crossed off the list, but I can still incorporate it in my walks, in my warm-ups. And then, I love, Breath by James Nestor. Yeah. And so that, that book blew my mind. And I'm always like nose only breathing,
mouth tape at night.
Make sure I'm mouth tape at night, breathe through my nose. Yeah. So I think there's so many ways we can increase our capacity to breathe. And if we have more capacity to breathe, we can reduce that sort of stress breathing we're doing all the time. And that alone would make a huge difference in sort of our overall perimenopausal mental experience.
Fantastic. Just fantastic. I was telling you before we got started, some of the things we were talking about with Patrick, and he was talking about this study that women who are still menstruating in the second half of their cycle, and we think that it's because of progesterone, actually hyperventilate. So one of the things he was saying is exactly what you're talking about, which is improving CO2 carbon dioxide tolerance. So taking a big breath of air and then waiting until you have that drive to let it out and then take another one. And the other thing I was mentioning too that we talked about, and we'll link to the show if you missed it, you definitely should listen to it because we talked all about how female breathing is different than male breathing. But he was also saying that in menopause, the pressure of blood carbon dioxide at rest was also higher too, because the drive to breathe is lessened after menopause. So I think that's fascinating. I don't pretend to be an expert the way Patrick is and how he so eloquently, described this. But what you're talking about is playing with the drive to breathe. So taking in a maximal breath and holding it, or maybe prolonging the exhale so that drive to inhale again starts to increase. And as we increase our CO2 tolerance, then that will provide some of the better outcomes that you're describing.
Yeah, it is. And I mean, just doing it walking or like light biking, if you do 5 minutes on the bike and at the top of the minute, you just take a max inhale and hold your breath as long as you can. It is, the drive to breathe is strong. But I found that, if I just do that 2 or 3 times a week and incorporate it in while I'm walking, huge difference in my ability to manage that. It's amazing.
All right. So you mentioned 8,000 steps in a day for walking. I tend to agree. I have a couple of thoughts, but I'd love for you to tell me why you think 8,000 steps may be different from sometimes we see online influencers say like you have to get 10, you have to get 12, you have to get 15,000. Tell us about 8,000. Tell us about zone 1 and 2 cardio and why that, or do you think that is enough for us to be training the base, like training our cardiorespiratory fitness in midlife as women?
Sure. So I used to be a diehard, like 10 or 12,000 steps a day person.
Yeah.
And I was like, that's how I was going to live my life, was like 12,000 steps. That's my goal every
Pretending
day.
I'm
That's
in
what I had
Europe.
set in my Garmin. Yeah, exactly. Like I walk everywhere.
Yeah.
And then I read this study that came out, and it was, very comprehensive, that showed that you had a, overall, 51% increase in your lifespan by walking 8,000 steps a day, and that it did go up to 60%, I think, at 10,000 steps a day. But then, the increase was sort of less as you went up in steps. So basically the benefits you get, the way I took it was, you get the best and biggest benefit at 8,000 steps. So, there's research to support that that's a pretty good number for most of us, and that you can really get a longevity benefit from that number of steps. But what I like about it is it's actually realistic for like normal humans.
Right.
I found, especially at 12,000 steps, there'd be a lot of days where I just couldn't achieve 12,000 steps. I'm, again, a mom. I work full time, have a busy life. My kids are in sports. I mean, I'm doing all the things, but I was finding that it was just difficult to make 12,000 steps. And, again, as a busy working mom, I don't need like one more thing a day that I fail at. And I can't be failing at my steps every day. Like, that's just depressing. Like, that's worse for my health than getting steps. And I found that I can get 8,000 steps without actually going for a walk most of the time, like consciously. And here's how I do it. I mean, I try to walk for 10 minutes at the end of my workouts. We like to cool down by just walking to the corner, and we think it's about an 800 or something. I'm a huge fan of taking walking meetings during my workday. If there's a call or anything I can do that doesn't require me to be on a Zoom, or if I'm in person with one of my employees, taking a walking meeting is a great way to accumulate some steps. And then I love taking a post-meal walk. So if I just walk for 10 or 15 minutes after lunch and, 15 or 20 minutes after dinner, I find that I can really easily achieve 8,000 steps. So I feel like I'm getting this big benefit without having to, because like you, I'm an exerciser. I like to work out, but I usually have like this beautiful hour to do that. I don't have an hour to exercise and a whole other hour to walk. Like, I don't have that much time. So unless I can incorporate in this walking amongst other things I'm doing. So I find that it is achievable. There is a ton of research to support that that is a really good number, and that there's sort of a decreasing benefit with the more steps you get. So obviously more is better, but you're going to really get the bulk of the benefit at about 8,000 steps a day. And then, from a recovery perspective, our whole lymphatic system is bootstrapped onto our muscular system. And if you think about your lymphatic system as like the sort of trash, like taking out the trash of your body every day, the way that we clear our lymphatic system and recover from our workouts and all of the crazy things we're doing is by moving. And I find that walking is the best way to do that. And, there's 1,000 other benefits. I mean, my husband and I like to take a 20-minute walk after dinner, and we talk and connect. So there's this sort of human element in walking. We interact with our neighbors. We get some sunlight on our bodies. I mean, there are just 1,000 reasons why I think walking is so important. As for zone 1, zone 2 cardio, what I see in women in our age group is that they get plenty of that, because that's what we've been telling women to do for all these years. We've been telling them to go to the hour-long spinning classes, or the even all these classes that are called high intensity interval training classes, which really aren't. They're mostly zone 2 training, like, Orange Theory and a lot of these other classes are really more like zone 2. They're not really high intensity. What I've found for women in this age is that they actually, between walking and whatever sort of cardio they've picked up over the years that they like to do, are tending to get the zone 2 that they need. What they're not, and they're also really starting to incorporate strength training. I think the missing piece actually is the high intensity sprinting. That's the missing piece.
Yeah.
And by high intensity sprinting, I mean like 15 seconds tops, max sprinting on, an erg or a ski erg or an assault bike, or, if you're a runner, although you really need to be a good runner, because, if you're 52 and full out sprinting, I know I would get injured if I did that. But I think that's a missing piece. So I think you can get, a lot of your sort of low level cardio by walking and doing the things that we've been trained to do since the 90s as women. And that if we can just learn how to have a bit of a sufferfest once a week. Like once a week, I do this workout that is 10 rounds of 15-second max wattage sprints and 1 minute of recovery. It doesn't take that long. It's like a 12-minute workout, all in. And I think it is sort of the missing piece. I think, because we've told people that things like Orange Theory and CrossFit and berries and all these things are high intensity interval training, but like they're really not. They're really mid intensity training. And in many cases, like zone 2.
Yeah. I was just interviewing Stacey Sims, and I borrowed her term soul food. So STEP would be considered that. It is definitely not high intensity. It's definitely not maximal intensity training. It's sort of mid, like maybe a zone 3. If I'm doing if I add in some plyos across the box or something, maybe it's like zone 3, zone 4. But it's soul food. Like I just love it. So don't give it up. But also, like you said, once a week, you have one really tough workout that's somewhere between 12 and 18 minutes or whatever, where it's all out. It's super anabolic. Like when we're thinking about menopause and perimenopause and optimizing hormones, this is one of the ways that we can do it. It's very anabolic in nature. You're driving up estrogens, you're driving up androgens, which is things that we lose, in those perimenopausal, in those transitional years. So I think it is important for us to have at least some kind of like plyos or jump or like sprint intervals, high intensity intervals. All of those things I think have their place. I think you get some of the type 2, well, you do get type 2, like type 2A and you get some type 2B fibers potentially if you're utilizing tempo in your training. But I do think that there needs to be like that sprint interval. I think you need to have sprint intervals as you were describing. I love the 10 rounds at 15 seconds. That's good. I might borrow that.
Yeah, I mentioned her before, but Dr. Marileo Pezzo from Stanford, she gave this great description. She said strength training and high intensity interval training are like a long-term stable relationship. And cardio, more like zone 2 training is dating, which means there's like, you can do step aerobics for a while and then you can be into Pelotoning and then you want to ride your bike and then you're going to go through a phase of running and then you want to do whatever. Like you can really spend your life like experimenting when it comes to that side of it, but you need to find a long-term relationship with strength training and that high intensity real sprint training. Those things just need to be constants, and then go play and have your fun in those other areas, right? Like that's where I love to ride my mountain bike, and I used to love step aerobics, like, and I probably will go back to it. And there's so many ways you can get that kind of training in. The sky's the limit, and you don't need to do one way your whole life. You can experiment and try different things. And when you get bored, you can switch. But the things, the long-term stable relationship you need to maintain is the strength training in that once or twice a week of just all out pain cave, short sprints.
Pain cave. I love that. Pain cave. And what was the other word you just said? Stress fest? Is that what you said?
I don't know.
Oh my gosh, it's so
the
good.
pain cave, I'll tell you really quickly, by the way, because it's a funny story.
Yeah.
When we had our early CrossFit gym, which was famously in a parking lot, and Kelly brought his physical therapy practice into our parking lot gym, but in order to be able to see patients, he needed like a building,
room,
and I'm saying that in air quotes.
Yeah.
We rented this little mini shipping container.
Oh my goodness.
And like a half-size shipping container. And that's where he would see his physical therapy patients.
That's awesome.
And it was named the Pain Cave. So anyone who was lucky enough to, or unlucky enough to see Kelly in the shipping container Pain Cave, that's where we got that name.
Oh, that's such a good, I love it. My patients used to call me Magic Hands. So I love the Pain Cave too. That's awesome. And then they would also be like, your elbows, what do you do there? I'm like, they're razor sharp elbows for getting into those back muscles. This has been such so juicy. You've made, I don't know how you've done it, but you've made mobility really sexy. So that was like the goal of this conversation.
I hope so.
I want to point people to where they can find you and Kelly. You both do such good work. And if I can, before you do that, I just have to hat tip to you because you really make fitness and mobility and rehab and prehab, you make it so accessible. And I love that there's no dogma. This is something that I do shudder at a little bit online, where we see people saying, foam rolling, it's terrible for you, doesn't do anything, or walking is not really an exercise, and all these different, like, people are just like chirping online.
Yes.
And I just really appreciate, it's like, you are a mom, you are in it too, and you have found some of these strategies that work with a plethora of evidence, which is just, when we talk about evidence-based strategies and action items, it's like, what's available in the literature, what's the clinician's, expertise, and what does the patient want? And you sort of have your foot in all of those things, and you're able to sort of synthesize them together. So just thank you so much.
Oh, and I want to thank you and I know you appreciate this because you're a clinician. One of the things I think has been so great in our industry is this lean into sort of deep science and studies. But sometimes I think the pendulum's gone a little far there, and that we've forgotten to include this clinical and lived experience. So many clinicians like you are out there, making change and having these experiences with patients, which matters, patients and clients, it really matters. And oftentimes, that clinical experience and clinical data somehow isn't sort of leveled up as much as like a double blind, RCT.
Right.
And again, those things are important, but clinical experience working with actual people, like those things also really matter as much as well. And so I appreciate that you have that sort of very holistic point of view about it. I really am grateful for that.
Thank you. All right. So where can people find you and Kelly online?
Yeah. So I am at Juliet Starrett on Instagram. Our business is The Ready State. So we are at The Ready State on all the social platforms, and thereadystate.com is our website.
Thank you so much. It's been wonderful.
Thank you so much for having me. You're so awesome.
Welcome to the after party, where I give you my closing thoughts on what I really thought of the show. And I don't know if it was obvious when I was talking to her, but did you see the hearts coming out of my eyes, or did you hear them? Because everything she was saying was just chef's kiss. So, couple favorite points. First, what I'm calling the tale of two grandmothers. Now, you have all heard me on the show talk about how I, in no uncertain terms, one of my goals in life, if I'm ever indicted into the prestigious grandmother club, I want to be the favorite one. So I loved that she actually was painting this stark contrast between one grandmother who could get on the floor and interact with the baby, interact with the grandson, I believe, and then the other who didn't feel comfortable getting on the floor, maybe who had some knee issues or spinal issues or ankle mobility issues or balance, proprioception issues, and had very different relationships with the child. So I thought that was, as I said at the beginning of the conversation with her, I struggled as a clinician to get people to buy in, to have full buy-in for mobility. And that is a very motivating thing for me, just because I'm competitive and I want to win. So I loved the tale of the two grandmothers. That really made me smile, and also reminded me why it is so important to be doing things like squatting at my son's soccer games and doing the sit to stand test that Juliet was describing. The other thing which is a little more subtle, but I do have to point it out. I actually stopped her at one point. I was like, I just love the words you're using, when she was saying, just get curious. Just get curious about what that means. Pain is just a request for change. And I think that for women in midlife, gosh, we're so hard on ourselves, right? Like, we always are like, I'm the failure. It's me. Hi, I'm the problem. It's me. So I loved the neutrality of the language that she was using all throughout the conversation. But there's that particular moment, I was like, this is such a good reframe and such good language for you, my Betties, to hear. The other thing I really loved, obviously, was the sitting, and I'm glad that she is going to take my idea of squatting at my son's soccer game. So you'll always, if our teams are ever playing each other, you're going to know that it's me, because I'm going to be the one in the bleacher squatting. But I love what she was talking about with hip flexion and coming down to hip extension or lack of that in our natural lives, as well as thoracic spine extension. So actually, I am going to look up the product that I think she called it, I wrote it down in my notes here. I think it's the Chirp Wheel. I'm going to actually look that up. And if it's on Amazon, then it is definitely getting delivered to my house in the next couple of days. Loved that. Loved her general overview of a well-considered program. I liked when we were talking about this idea that you can always integrate mobility. It doesn't have to be a separate thing on your to-do list, but if you are training the stretch position, and if you've listened to me, you'll know that this is something I love to talk about, is playing with tempo. So biasing eccentric load, biasing the stretch, getting into that long stretch position of the muscle, that is mobility. And then now if you're adding load onto that, so some type of weight, now it's a considered strength and mobility program. So overall, chef's kiss. Love everything about her. Love everything that her and her husband have created. And I hope you enjoyed this as well. And if this is something, this podcast is if you are finding that you are getting value at it, please consider writing us a review. I read all of them, as you saw in the intro. I saw this one on Spotify and I just had to shout it out. And or iTunes or wherever you are listening to it. We read all of them and we consider all critical feedback, good feedback, bad feedback, the ugly feedback. We take it all in because we want to be Operation World Class for you. So until next time, I bid you adieu. Thanks so much for listening.